All right, so Chuck, the Brewers lost 106 games in 2002. Complete dysfunction. They're firing their manager. You got the interim manager getting yelled at by Paul DeYoung on the mound. How the heck did the crew get back to 500 in just 3 seasons later and then get to the playoffs in 2008?
Well, I remember after that season, the C League sent out a memo apologizing the day after how badly things were. And I saw something similar when I saw management of the White Sox did something after the season ended this past year, right? Am I got that
Yeah,
right? Yeah, I
yeah.
saw them. I saw, and it reminded me of when Wendy Seelig apologized to Brewers fans, how embarrassing of a season it was. And there was nowhere to go but up from then. And the Brewers did. They hired Ned Yost. Uh, Doug Melvin eventually became the general manager. And there was new ownership, Mark Atanasio. There was just a fresh life into this. And it kind of started with Prince Fielder and Ricky Weeks drafting high and drafting those two, and then the Corey Harts and all that. But those two were kind of the backbones. The turnaround didn't really, you saw a glimpse of it in 2004, 2005, some more. Brewer fans started thinking, okay, we got something good here, starting with young players. And then they didn't make the postseason to 2008. So it still took like 3 or 4 or 5 seasons, 6 seasons before things really got right. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and it also happened because you had a guy like Doug Melvin then who even was able to get guys, even off the scrap heap that were at least worth watching. Like, you don't get Carlos Lee without finding Scott Podsednik off the scrap heap.
Yeah. Scott Podsednik, who later played for the White Sox, he was good in his year here, and Carlos Lee, Okabayo, he was terrific. Fans loved him. But yeah, he made a couple of trades. Eventually got CC in 2008 that put him over the hump. But the Brewers, not only that 100-loss season, but there were seasons before that. The Brewers have been one of the more frustrating franchises in baseball history. They don't have a World Series championship. They don't have. They got one World Series appearance. So even before that 100-loss season, there were several dreadful years. They went 26 years without making the postseason, even with expanded postseason coming in I believe 96 or 97. So dreadful baseball, and it's easy to get caught up into that. I think a lot of it had to do financial. Now I don't know what the resources are for the White Sox, but I would think living in Chicago, being in a big Chicago market, there's an ability to spend more than the Milwaukee Brewers and their $100 million payroll. With they've been consistent, the Brewers have in the last few years, but there was a time when it was just dreadful baseball.
Yeah, wasn't it 13 seasons where they finished under 500, like 13
Yeah.
straight? I remember 2005 when I was working at the ballpark and covering the team. Like that was a cause for celebration. And I remember like Chad Moeller being like, "I want to make the playoffs," and everybody was like, I remember talking to him in the clubhouse, and everybody was like, "Dude, just celebrate this." Like
Yeah.
81 and 81 was considered a triumph. Um, the Sox financial situation though is almost strikingly similar to what the Seelix were in that it seems like almost Jerry Reinsdorf isn't rich enough to own the team anymore. Now, granted, he's worth $2 billion, but a lot of that's in the Bulls and the Sox actually their value,
Mhm.
and they're just not spending. They just said Austin Slater was one of their top targets, and they just gave him a $1.75 million deal. With the Sox cutting payroll, especially being this historically bad, does this sound a lot like the Seelix toward the end of their run?
It did, because in the 90s, and salary was a little different there. If they signed somebody for $5 million a year, that was like, wow, really? Like Hideo Nomo, they got off the scrap heap, and he came in here and was productive for like the year he was here. And that's who they would get. They didn't have the ability to go out and sign. They still don't. They today they have no shot at an Alex Bregman, even though I'd love to see that. Yeah, the spending, but I don't know. But I could never understand that with the White Sox. I could never understand, even the Cubs. I don't know, understand. I'm glad they don't spend more, but the White Sox, we're talking a major market here, Chicago. How come they're not spending more money? We all remember the 2005 team. That was a fun team to watch, but how come there hasn't been any success since then?
Because they've been operating like it's 2005. I mean,
Yeah.
the one thing that, a lot of Brewers fans, they keep cursing Atanasio about not being able to spend money. At least he's been embracing how you should be spending money in a small market, embracing the analytics, embracing the data. The White Sox just had to rename their department, research and development or whatever, R&D, just to make it more palatable to Jerry to actually embrace analytics, because he's been operating, back in like, he was saying Branch Rickey, if he could get Branch Rickey to be the GM in today's day and age, he would. I mean, that's just how far behind the times they are, where you look at the Brewers, especially once Atanasio came in, it seemed like he just breathed new life into the franchise, where now it's just complaining he's not pushing all his chips into the center, correct?
He did breathe new life. Now, my complaint is, how come the Brewers are only spending $100 million when St. Louis down the road is at 160? I don't see much of a difference in the market size. So the Brewers are still doing it economically. They're filling up the place. The Brewers are, for weekend games and, for weekday afternoon games. They draw well. The TV contract really isn't that. I think that's the biggest difference. I would like to see what, and you would probably know more about this, the White Sox TV contract as opposed to what the Brewers get for a TV contract, which is going to take a dip here because Bally Sports isn't associated with them anymore.
Yeah, so to provide that to the Milwaukee right now, the Sox are actually almost going to be claiming poverty technically for a big market team, because they just created their own sports network, Chicago Sports Network, and the cable grift is dead. Like, that's the problem, So for like the Brewers and even the White Sox, they need to be looking forward to 2028, when hopefully Rob Manfred, his last decent act that he'll ever do, his only decent act is to cobble up all 30 teams as local contracts and sell that nationally, because that's what's happening right now to the White Sox. They're not on Comcast right now. That's the 50%, largest provider, or the largest cable provider in Chicago. 50% of the audience has that. They're trying the over-the-air option, which the signal is terrible. They're what is it? They just launched their own direct-to-consumer, which is $19.99 for one team. You probably would know in Milwaukee, you could have gotten $19.99 when the Brewers were still on with Bailey. You could have gotten the Bucks that won a championship. It's either $19.99 for one team or $29.99 for the Brewers. For the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox. So that's the other reason why the Sox are cutting back on payroll is they don't know what their revenue streams are going to look like, because also NBC, who now they're arguing with to get onto Comcast, pulled out of the, basically gave them the hint that we're not getting in the RSN business anymore because the cable grift is over. That's the biggest thing.
And it sounds a little bit like Milwaukee in a sense where, we're trying to figure out where the TV money is going to come from. But that shouldn't happen in Chicago. There should be a TV that surprises me. And I know the White Sox haven't been very attractive lately, but that's not, they're not going to win 40 games for the next couple of seasons. There's some, I looked at the White Sox this past year, man, they got some guys, there's some individuals on that team who can play. There's some guys on that team who can play. But I think in Chicago, it was done in the past and it could happen again. I think they have a shot at getting back to it, and it might not happen overnight. Of course, it never does, especially their climb. But what they needed to do, I thought, is just clean house and bring in some fresh blood, and maybe need fresh ownership too. And like you said, with Mark Antanasio, I thought that the Brewers at that time needed fresh ownership, because Seelig was as good a commissioner as he was a little dated as an owner. And but as an owner today, doesn't have the pockets to fit in. Even though this Brewers team franchise doesn't spend a lot of money, Seelig, and maybe the White Sox need to do the same thing with Reinsdorf.
Yeah, that's the hope. They're hoping that he sells. And the other thing is maybe could it potentially, the Brewers do bottom out again in 2015. They lost 94 games. They make a couple of shrewd trades, Doug Melvin on his way out the door, and then they bring in David Stearns. They got it turned around within 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Draft picks, good draft picks will help that. Younger players, you need to do that. You're not going to go out and make some blockbuster trades or sign some big free agents if you're the Milwaukee Brewers. But you don't have to be bad for long. You're not going to turn into a World Series champion overnight, but you don't have to be bad for it's possible to draft and develop players and win, and maybe struggle with the younger guys. And this is where the problem is. like during the trading deadline, I heard the White Sox, they want to trade this young guy and this guy, young guy, and all that. It's like, man, why don't they keep some of those young guys? They're good players. Go with those guys.
No, I fully agree that I mean
Yeah.
it's kind of what the Brewers have done. They keep the guys up until just before they either have to get rid of them, like
Yeah.
Josh Hader, even though it sunk the
Yeah.
2022 season. But on the flip side, they're not afraid to let a guy walk, like say how they let Prince Fielder walk for nothing, and they're going to let Willie Adames walk for nothing.
I
Sometimes
just
you got to push your chips to the center.
I just looked at the White Sox as being kind of a sleeping giant. You know what I kind of mean on that, Todd? I just think
Mhm.
there's something there with the White Sox where they could turn it around, just like the Milwaukee Brewers have. The Brewers haven't won a World's. They can't get by the first round of the playoffs, but at least right now they own the NL Central for the time being. And I think if the White Sox in that division, the American League Central, even though Cleveland won it this past year, and the Twins are good, but they can make a move in that division.
Yeah, I mean that's why I wanted to bring you on just to kind of
Yeah,
show the parallels. How did the
sure.
Brewers do it? The Brewers, because the Brewers bottomed out in 106 losses. They bottomed out again in that, and then they're bringing in Walker McKinven. I always keep
Yeah.
getting that. Uh, you familiar with him? I know you cover the team regularly for AP Radio. If you got to know him, and what could he bring to the team?
Well, he their coordinator on run prevention, and that's a title that maybe wasn't around in 2005. But what he does is he helps, just like what the title says, run prevention with the Milwaukee Brewers, align defenses, works with the catching department, um, preventing runs, preventing the other teams. What can we do to prevent the other team from putting up runs against us defensively in certain things? He was an up and comer in the Brewers organization, so he's a good guy to have. And a guy like that is not going to stay around because there's other coaches ahead of him on the staff. So he was not going to move up here. But this is what the White Sox need to do: bring in people from other staffs in other organizations who've been successful before, and that's what I think they're doing here.